And if we look back like at the worst of the crisis in the Great Recession, the worst that we've seen in the past 20 years was a 13.7% delinquency rate on credit cards, and we are currently on a hockey stick path straight up at 11%. Welcome to Loans Elevated, the podcast that brings you the latest industry news, expert interviews, and insightful discussions that will help you stay ahead in this dynamic market. I'm your host, Broch Lassig, and I've spent years in the trenches of the mortgage industry, helping individuals and businesses navigate the complex landscape of real estate financing.
I'm your co-host, TJ Heidenreich, and together we'll cover a wide range of topics, from business strategies that skyrocket your success to mindset and motivation that fuel your growth.
All right, welcome back to Loans Elevated, and I'm here with TJ. He's been absent for a while, so TJ, welcome back.
In
at
the
least
game.
Together.
He's
been absent.
A minute.
We are talking today about money, and one of the major components of this is obviously debt with households, and with a looming economic recession and things, with inflation really high. This is a hot topic for a lot of people. So I wanted to just open this and give you guys some data and facts on what really is going on with the U.S. consumer. So if you look at just credit card debts, I pulled up some data. We reported about a year ago on the podcast, we reported that credit card debt had exceeded $1 trillion. And it was like, we were mind blown. It was crazy. But since that time, so about a year later, it's gone up 15% to 1.14 trillion. So if we're talking 15% in a year.
Well, and that's quarter two data.
Yeah,
so
true.
We don't have.
Yeah, we don't even have third quarter data.
Yeah.
So we don't know how fast this is going.
Exactly.
But if you think that's increasing at a clip of 15% per year, like if we look at that,
that's a crazy spiral.
It is insane. Let's just say we're at 1.15 trillion now, and it goes up 15% in one more year. We're at 1.35 trillion. In 5 years, we're at 2.5 trillion in
it just compounds.
Just credit card debt for consumers. Like it's a scary
it's
cycle.
It's not sustainable, and that's why a lot of people are calling this the debt bubble.
100%. And the crazy part about that is our economy is so heavily based on consumer spending and us purchasing services and goods, and it is so rampant with credit card debt. That's what's fueling this. It's not actual earnings that are fueling this. People are just going into debt, and it's becoming easier. And then also, we reported on this on a previous episode, the buy now, pay later. Buy now, pay later is revolving credit that is also not reported in these numbers because it's data that's not reported. It's kind of private. There's probably a reckoning in the compliance of that type of debt coming soon because it's not reported. So anyway, don't need to beat a dead horse. I just wanted to mention one other thing on credit card debt that adds on to that is not only are we rapidly increasing in balances, but if we look at the total delinquencies in the same period, delinquencies have gone from about 8% to almost 11%. And if we look back like at the worst of the crisis in the Great Recession, the worst that we've seen in the past 20 years was a 13.7% delinquency rate on credit cards, and we are currently on a hockey stick path straight up at 11%. Like,
well,
it's
and that's
insane.
not factoring in other debts people have.
Yeah.
I just pulled up some other data. We've also got, let's see here, 1.6 trillion in auto loan debt, and then another 1.6 trillion in student loan debt. And a lot of people say student loan debt's cheap, but it's really not, because if the government holds the note, your rates are still 8 or 9% right now.
Oh,
and
they're
if it's privately
super
funded,
high.
You're looking at in the teens, the high teens, maybe even 20% range.
Yeah, it's wild.
And then let's see here.
And a lot of people on that note got tripped up on not paying them off and interest accrued and different things because of the deferments that were put into place. So that's getting uglier and uglier.
Yeah, for sure. And then you've also got 380 billion in HELOCs as well on top of that.
Wow.
Which is crazy to think. But
okay, so that's a total of what? Let's see. I think I have the numbers here. That's a total of almost, it's 12.9 trillion in, or forgive me, 4.9 trillion in non-housing debt.
Wow.
12.9 trillion in mortgage debt, but almost 5 trillion in non-mortgage debt. We believe mortgage debt is just fine to have because it's attached to an asset that's appreciating over time. So it's not bad debt. It's tax advantaged because you can oftentimes write off the interest, so on and so forth. So we don't think that that's bad. A couple other points. The delinquency rates on other items. Student loans are obviously at record lows. Mortgages, record lows. However, you've got auto loans. They're hovering at about we're about 1% away from where we were at the peak of the Great Recession. Wow. So you've got that. You've got other debts and credit card debts.
And this is just the beginning of the job market softening.
Yeah.
So if this continues, I would expect that to spike even more.
Right. It's crazy. Wow. So this is not a data episode, but we wanted to just intro like how significant this is. Oh, you pulled up a stat. The average household, did you say that? Average household has how much in debt?
Yeah.
Non-mortgage debt?
Let's see, it's somewhere up here. $104,000.
In non-mortgage debt.
In consumer debt.
That's the average household. There's households that have obviously tremendously more than that.
And that's also factoring in home equity lines of credit. So non-first mortgage debt.
Got it. Yep. So 104,000 on average, and let's just say that the average rate is, 8%? Probably higher than that.
I'd say higher.
9?
Yeah, I would say 9 to 10%.
Yeah, because some of those are credit cards.
Yeah.
So it's probably more like 12.
I would say anywhere between 10 to 12%.
12%. Yeah. So let's just say that's on 12%. Obligations, and we'll just say on average a 7-year term. That means that the average household, this is rough, we're just guessing here. The average household has somewhere between $1,800 and $2,100 per month in obligations above and beyond their mortgage, just in the consumer debt they have. So this is a massive crisis, and the crisis will get worse for families as the economy continues softening. And the whole topic of today was, one, to introduce the reality of how significant of a problem this is for very many people, most people, I would say. And now we want to talk about strategies. How do you get ahead of the curve, and how do you consolidate this debt to reduce your monthly outgo and put yourself in a better financial position that doesn't put you at massive risk with the unforeseen issues that the economy faces going into the future.
Right.
So let's dive into that.
I'm seeing this a lot right now. Even with the clients that they purchased in the past couple of years, we're starting to talk about refinancing, and they are saving so much more. Like, I've had the opportunity to help someone with a cash out refinance recently. Their rate stayed the same on the mortgage, but we paid off over $20,000 in credit card debts and 2 auto loans, and they're saving way more money over time because we're able to wrap that all into one mortgage. And also, I talked about the tax advantages of writing off that interest they're paying and saving a ton of money over time. People just don't realize that.
Yeah. And then you think about, like, with our whole theory, which is optimize leverage to mitigate risk, which is what he's talking about here, those two things. But then the next step is maximizing wealth creation, which is now they could take that passive income, essentially. They just literally gave themselves a raise by being more creative and more thoughtful in the way they structure their debt. And now they could be contributing hundreds of dollars more per month to their 401k or IRA, which turns into hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars over the long run at retirement. And so it's like, you got to look past, you can't be linear in your thought process of like, well, I've got this rate and I've got this payment. It'll be paid off in 5 years. And, so I'm just not even going to mess with it. Lots of people get caught in this one track thinking, as opposed to a holistic thought process on strategic debt consolidation, essentially. And that's what we are really, really, really good at. Yeah. And frankly, I don't blame people for getting caught on that one track thought process, because it's very emotional for families that are in this debt, and it's emotional to absorb equity in your house to consolidate other debts. So you just feel like, hey, I'm going to grit and muscle through it just to get it paid off. And The fact is that the emotions are just getting in the way of the wisest
like
financial decision. Right.
And one thing too that I should also state is that when you do a cash out refinance versus a rate and term, you do get a little bit less or not as optimal terms by doing a cash out instead of a rate and term, which that's what they were going back and forth on. And I think that they were so focused on the interest rate on their mortgage because they could actually lower it by going rate and term. And
rate and term means no cash out.
Yep.
Just lowering the rate.
Just lowering the interest rate.
Out, no debt consolidation.
But once we factored in all the other debts, that's when it really made sense. So you have to see past just your mortgage rate. I think that we look at that all the time just because that's what the news focuses on. But you've got to look at that 20% interest rate on the credit card or whatever.
Which is
12%
insane. You said they paid off
loan.
$20,000 in credit cards. And the average credit card is 24% interest right now. Average. Right. There's probably some that are higher than that.
Yeah, for sure.
That alone is more than $400 a month in just credit card interest.
Right. Plus auto loans of like 9 or 10%. So
that's insane.
Yeah. Right.
Insane.
Right.
So the point is, don't allow yourself to get tripped up and dismiss the fact that you have options. Even if you have a COVID era interest rate on your mortgage, who cares? There's this whole concept of blended rates. And that's what essentially we're talking about now. Well, we're talking about cash flow, but it feeds into blended rates. And if you have a super low rate on your mortgage, that's fine and dandy. But if you have a 9% rate on the car and a 10% rate on the boat and a 24% rate or higher on the credit cards and 9-10%, 8 to 10% on student loans, well, when you gather all that debt up, and you've got somewhere between, I don't know, we see a lot of applications every year. What do you think average consumer debt that we personally see? I say it's anywhere from like on the low end. Obviously, there's some people with none, but 80% of the people, low end is like 40,000,
right?
And high end, if you include student loans for people highly educated, hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, 200,000-300,000. I mean, that's the average number comes of 104 or whatever we were just stated. Yeah,
and that's very common to have like 200,000 plus in this debt. So if you're looking at paying off a mortgage of, just for example, 500,000, and let me just pull this up here. So if you're looking at paying off a mortgage of 500,000, and you've got a 3% mortgage rate, you might think, oh, there's no way I should ever touch that mortgage rate. But the reality is that may not make sense because let me just show you this. You've got a mortgage of 500,000 at 3% rate, and then you have, we'll just say, I don't know, $40,000 in debt that is at a 9% rate. So student loans, car loans, boat loans, whatever. And then you've got maybe another $25,000 in credit card debt that is at 24%. So just that alone, and that's relatively low debt. There's people with dramatically more than this, but 40,000 in like a car loan and then 25,000 in credit card debt. So pretty average household. That is at about a 4.5% blended rate, even with the 3% mortgage rate that you have now. Now, the thing that you have to think about, to TJ's point, is this concept, which we're not tax accountants. You got to get advice from a legitimate tax accountant. We're just trying to plant ideas that you can investigate to help you financially. So bear that in mind. But let's just say you get a mortgage rate of 6.5%, which is widely available right now, even lower. But let's just say, for example, 6.5%. Well, if you happen to sit in a tax bracket of, let's just say you're paying 30% in taxes to state and federal combined, well, that basically means you get a 30% discount on your mortgage interest by consolidating everything and now paying enough in interest to deduct that interest. So,
and can you write up to like 750,000?
Yeah.
Off in interest?
Yeah. Or 750,000 in mortgage amount. Gotcha. Yeah. So anyway, you take 30% off. This is ironic how these numbers just worked out, honestly. It was not planned this way. But 6.5% mortgage rate, assume a 30% discount because of tax savings. Your effective interest that you're paying now because of the tax benefits is 4.5%. It's almost exactly the same as what I just ran. And bear in mind, I only ran that at 65,000 in debt. We said the average household has 104,000. Right. Those numbers would change dramatically if we update that. Let's just do that. Let's just say 70,000 there.
And while you're pulling that up, reason why we're saying that is you can't write off the interest you pay on credit cards or
student
loans or anything else. The only debt you can is on a mortgage. Mm-hmm. That's the power behind it.
Super big trick. So if we go up to the average household, 104,000 average household, that's a 4.9. So almost a 5%, basically a 5% blended rate. That's with a 3% first mortgage rate. So that is huge in and of itself. But to TJ's point, what you're doing by extending this debt, reducing the cash flow or the burden of expense on a monthly basis, now you have the ability to reinvest those monthly savings into either retirement, or some people we look at and say, hey, well, why don't we invest that money into prepaying the mortgage? If that's your main focal point is getting the debt paid off, the mortgage paid off, let's just reinvest those savings into the mortgage. So give me the example of that client that you talked about or that you helped just recently. What were the net monthly savings? And what was their mortgage balance?
Yeah, it was around $550, roughly. $550, paying off a truck, balance of $40,000. And then 2 credit cards, balance of around $20,000 total.
So they were probably saving about $1,500 a month in consumer obligations, and they were only adding $390 a month to their mortgage payment. And in this case, their rate was staying the same.
Yeah, they're adding about $400 a month in mortgage payment.
So $400 a month in mortgage payment, but they're cutting $1,500 out of other debts. So now these people have $1,100 in savings. That's what I wanted to get to. $550K mortgage. Let's just say, for example, a 6.5% rate, and now I'm investing that $1,100 per month in savings back into the mortgage. So I'll give you this example, and then we'll talk about investing that somewhere else. But that puts you in a position where these people would have paid off their mortgage in how many years? Like 28, 29 years?
Yeah.
28 and a half years, let's call it. This puts them in a position with the exact same dollars out of pocket. They pay their house off in 16 years. Like, are you kidding me? You're debt-free 12 years earlier by just being strategic. Now, the other potential option here is if we pull up the compound interest calculator and we say, all right, let's throw that $1,100 a month in the 401k. Now, bear in mind, you could get employer match on that money potentially. There are tax savings on that as well, because 401k is pre-tax deduction, so you could maybe even contribute more than $1,100 per month if you bake in the tax savings. But let's just say you throw that in the S&P 500, making 10%, and you let that money ride for 30 years.
Yeah, I did 8%, and it's 1.63 million with no initial investment, just $1,100 a month.
Wow. Yeah, zero monthly investment. So I ran that same number, 10% return.
Which is probably closer to what, the S&P tracks closer to 12%. So yeah, it's
so 10%. My personal money grows at 10% every year on average.
Right, 8% is a little bit too conservative.
So 10%, 30 years, $1,100 a month turns into $2.5 million.
That's crazy.
That is, let's just say 16 years down the road, because that's how quick you could have your mortgage paid off alternatively. You have $517,000 in the bank 16 years down the road with the same amount of money.
You've probably paid down your mortgage by a third by that time anyways. So
yeah,
you've got, at that time, you probably still have $300K left over after you've paid off the house.
Exactly. Yeah. So if we look 16 years down the road, you owe $378, but you now in the bank have $517.
So you've got $200K. Yeah. Close.
Grand sitting in the bank.
Crazy.
It's wild. So debt consolidation is a powerful tool. As long as you look at it holistically, you have a strategic plan, you have somebody that can understand all of this like us, and walk you through it and sidestep the emotions, because we're not emotionally involved in your financial situation. So we can help provide insights. Ultimately, it's your choice what you do with your money. But quickly, debt consolidation options. I'll list these off, the common ones that we look at. I'll start with the first one, which is a non-mortgage option. This is a 401k loan. So sometimes you can qualify for a hardship withdrawal or a hardship loan from your 401k and or just a regular standard loan to consolidate some of these debts. Cool thing about a 401k, if you have just limited debt and you're trying to consolidate that, unless you have a huge 401k balance, TBD, but we could guide you through this too. You can borrow this money at low interest rates, oftentimes lower than even mortgage rates are available. And the repayment terms can be long, so you can reduce your monthly exposure. But the coolest part about it is, let's just say you don't even reduce monthly exposure. You just swap the debt from being secured against your car to securing against your 401k. Well, the 401k loan, the interest you pay on that loan, you pay back to yourself. You pay it to your own account.
You don't see any difference.
You actually make,
right. It's
you're
still,
paying
it's
yourself.
accruing more than what you're paying. Yeah.
So you're basically zero interest because you're paying the interest to yourself. That is a super powerful option.
Right.
But that may not be an option for everybody. So alternatively, we have cash out refi like you talked about, and then we have HELOCs.
Yep.
So
And second mortgages.
second mortgage, fixed second mortgages. So both either variable or fixed, and cash out. So maybe just dive into discerning how we might guide a client in which option of those to take.
Yeah. So I'll dive into this second mortgage option because I've done one of those recently too. I had a client that his rate was like 2%, and he was so fixed on the idea, he did not want to touch it. And he had so much equity in the house that looking at a second mortgage, and he was also worried about rates going up. So he didn't want to look into a HELOC because most HELOCs are variable rate. And he was so worried that we've seen the past couple of years with interest rates, he didn't want to have anything to do with that. Now we do have fixed HELOC options, but ultimately we landed on a second mortgage because he knew he was going to use all of the mortgage balance at once and paid off a bunch of debt. And now he just has to worry about that second mortgage payment and his first mortgage payment. That's it.
And probably a second mortgage payment at like 7.5%.
Yeah.
Paying off debt that is somewhere between 9 and 25%.
Yep, exactly.
Like it is massive savings. So I was talking about the idea of replacing your low rate first mortgage and showing you how that sometimes is even a good idea. But sometimes it's not. If you have enough equity and you can tap into the second mortgages or the HELOCs, like you can have your cake and eat it too, because you can say you can keep that 2 or 3% mortgage rate, and then you can consolidate debts into a dramatically lower rate on the second mortgage. And the cool thing about it is that second mortgage, as rates go down, is also refinanceable.
Yep,
so you could just refinance that to a lower rate as rates come down and still not touch the first mortgage. So it's like, it's awesome. And then, of course, the cash out refi is just leveraging. So if you have a higher rate, I mean, I don't know how I could put a number on this, but I would say if people have a rate higher than like 4.5 on their first mortgage, doing a cash out loan probably makes better sense.
Right.
Because it just simplifies.
Yeah, this is only for like the below 4. Then it might make sense to do a second.
Yeah, and the only disadvantage I would say on a second loan or a HELOC, the disadvantage in my mind is you lose, again, our 3 pillars: optimize leverage, mitigate risk, maximize wealth. You lose the risk mitigation piece a little bit. Because if you have a first mortgage and now you've tapped into the second mortgage and you've utilized that equity, it's very difficult, and even if it's available, which we do have these available, to get a third position or a third lien. It becomes much more expensive and very limited how much you can borrow. So
one more hoops you have to jump through too.
Yeah, for sure. So if something bad comes up, unexpected, unforeseen, a sickness, a job loss, something like that, an accident, and you've used your equity in your house and you already have a first and a second mortgage, you lose that opportunity to tap into a second mortgage later from a risk mitigation standpoint. So that's why you have to look at this holistically and make decisions on a broad holistic basis, not a one-track linear basis like, well, my rate on my first mortgage is super low, so that's all that matters. I can't touch that. You have to really be thoughtful on what ripcords do you have in life to keep and maintain some financial resilience so that you don't get yourself in an unforeseen pickle and end up losing your house or filing bankruptcy or something. So anyway.
Next, one other thing on a HELOC too. A HELOC can be nice, especially right now, because with it being variable, now this isn't always going to be our advice, but right now with the Fed stating they're going to cut rates.
And they are cutting rates, not stating they are. They
have done,
and they likely will continue.
2 more for this year. Your interest rate is going to go down on that HELOC as well because it follows the Fed funds rate.
Instantaneously. Yep. So coming from 2 mortgage pros, we would never, ever, ever take a fixed second mortgage, ever.
Yep.
Because overnight, him and I were talking about this the day after the Fed cut rates. We pulled up our bank accounts on our HELOCs. Boom. Half a point reduction in our HELOC rates. Like you immediately get the benefit. Now it's scary on the other side, sure. But
at that time you could refinance it to a fixed rate.
Right, exactly. Yeah,
so you have to play the game a little bit. But that's the advantage to that. And also with a HELOC, you can take out a larger HELOC and only use a portion of it. That
Right.
way it's open for that risk mitigation tactic. If you ever need to tap into the equity, you don't have to jump through the hoops. It's already there and you can dive right into it.
I love that you bring that up because so many people are like, well, no, I only need 25,000. I'm like, well, you can get 400,000.
Yeah, might as well
No,
get
I
it.
only need 25,000. Like, why? You don't pay interest on the money you don't borrow.
Right.
And to the
And
risk
it's no different
mitigation point-
terms.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't get worse rates or anything. So just use 25 grand and have 375,000 sitting in liquid cash available in case of emergency. So anyway, I think we could bring massive value to every family out there, whether it be homeownership advice or debt consolidation advice, so on and so forth. We would love to be a resource for you and the people you know to help guide them through this because there are so many options to put yourself in a much better financial position. So we'd love for you to lean on us.
Thank you for tuning in. For more industry insights, follow us on all platforms at Loans Elevated.
And to get in touch with our team, call or text 801-713-4000 or visit loanselevated.com.